If there was one ship that could be chosen to symbolize the Rebel Alliance during the time of the Galactic Civil War, then there can only be one choice. The darling child of the Incom Corporation, the T-65 X-Wing. It starts with the Incom Corporation, a repulsor lift manufacturer based on the world of Freysia, who grew into an atmospheric and starfighter manufacturing company for centuries prior to the Battle of Yavin. Some of their most famous accomplishments being the ARC-170 starfighter used by the Old Republic during the Clone Wars, and the Z-95 Headhunter, one of the most prolific and versatile starfighters in the galaxy during the era of the Galactic Civil War for private organizations and government militaries with very lean funding. And Incom would have continued on this course, had it not been for the end of the Clone Wars and the rise of the Galactic Empire 19 years before the Battle of Yavin. Emperor Palpatine, like many Sith throughout history, demanded control, and he began to exert that control increasingly on Incom, forcing them to stop their current efforts to continue improving the Z-95 Headhunter design, and instead focus on creating landing barges for the Imperial Army. But the designers and engineers of Incom chafed at the growing demands and restrictions Palpatine enforced, and while they did build and complete the new prototype meant to replace the Z-95, they had no desire to let it fall into the hands of the Empire. But if Incom, the corporation, could not renege on their deal with the Imperials, then it was left up to the people who made the Starfighter Manufacturing Corporation what it was to take an almost unthinkable course of action: defection. 4 prototypes of this cutting-edge starfighter were made and based on Incom's home planet of Freysia. It was hoped by the defecting Incom staff that they could take their prototypes, along with themselves, and deliver them to the Rebel Alliance. However, Imperial security had discovered their intentions, and they moved to imprison the defectors as well as take possession of their prize starfighters. Fortunately, a daring raid by a small rebel strike force was able to liberate the prototypes from Freysia, and later in a subsequent raid, rescue the Incom scientists and engineers from right under the noses of the Empire's forces, thus securing the loyalty of Incom's top staff and the possession of their new starfighters. But what was this fighter that was so cutting edge and so powerful that it compelled Incom staff members to keep it away from the Empire? What was this fighter that would enable the Alliance's victory over the first Death Star, and then become a flying symbol for the rebels that would inspire others to resist the tyranny of the Galactic Empire? Well, you've probably guessed it, making all this build-up pointless, or you paid attention to the thumbnail when you clicked it. It's the X-Wing, the T-65 X-Wing starfighter. Its name comes from the 4 S-foil wings, which typically remain closed in sublight and hyperspace flight, but open into a X shape when in combat conditions. The X-Wing is perhaps the largest contributor when talking about the Rebel Alliance's superiority in starfighter technology. This was an important edge to have, as the TIE fighters of the Imperial Navy made up for their relative shortcomings by using swarm tactics in superior numbers. The Rebels could not match that. Their numbers were far less, their industrial base not nearly as strong compared to the monolith that was the Galactic Empire, and the careless disposal of lives supposedly went against what the Rebel Alliance believed in. The Rebel Starfighter Corps literally had to do more with less. And the X-Wing epitomized that, as it was a highly versatile, technologically superior starfighter that could fill any mission profile the Alliance High Command might need. Reconnaissance, atmospheric operations, escort duties, dogfighting, and hit and fade strikes all fell within its purview, making its title of Space Superiority Fighter well earned. From a technical perspective, one can better understand why the X-Wing was such a game-changer in the Galactic Civil War when compared to its Imperial space superiority equivalent, the TIE Fighter. So let's start with speed. In space, the X-Wing can go up to 100 megalights per hour top speed at maintenance power levels. Same with the TIE Fighter. We start with speed in this case, as despite their similar roles, this is the only specification where both fighters are at parity. However, the TIE fighters have the X-Wing's beat on acceleration, maneuverability, and speed when inside of an atmosphere. For deflector shields, the X-Wing has a deflector shield generator created by a company called Chempat, and which is rated at 50 SBD, whereas the TIE fighter has none. Like, nothing at all. just its bare hull exposed to the void of space and the laser fire from rebels trying to shoot them down. Next is the sensor array, which is an often overlooked and unglamorous system, but in this case, it was important to the X-Wing's capabilities. Located in the nose was a Fabritech sensor suite that was designed for much larger ships, and further improved upon by adding specialist packages from Incom subcontractors. These sensor systems greatly assisted in the X-Wing's ability to act as an independent unit, by providing superior telemetry and flight control, thus reducing the reliance on a capital ship or support vessel in the field. Moving on to hyperspace capability, we find another attribute the TIE fighters do not have, as the X-Wings are equipped with a Class 1 hyperdrive, which were often used for the long-range hit-and-fade operations that Rebel starfighters became known for during the course of the Galactic Civil War. Hit and fade being the term Rebel High Command used for missions that would have their strike craft hyper into an area of operations, complete their objectives, and then hyper out again before a stronger Imperial response can be mustered. Essentially, guerrilla warfare by any other name, which the X-Wing excelled at. Whereas the TIE Fighter and its sisters, the TIE Interceptor and the TIE Bomber, simply were not designed for hyperdrive integration, which meant that the mainline TIE starfighters needed a base or capital ship in the area of operations to deploy and return to, versus the Rebels who did not have to expose their few capital ships to immediate danger to carry out the business of war. Then there's offensive armament. The TIE fighters equipped with two LS-1 laser cannons manufactured by Sinar Fleet Systems, which like every other Imperial craft, had the distinctive Imperial green color in their laser blasts, whereas the X-Wing uses 4 KX-9 model laser cannons, or 4 IX-4 cannons, both made by the Taman Bach Corporation. Unlike the Sinar equivalent, and like most other laser cannons in the galaxy, their lasers are colored red-orange. Another important difference is that the TIE fighters only have laser cannons, whereas the X-Wing has quad lasers and 2 Krupp-X MG7 proton torpedo launchers, meaning that the X-Wing, especially in a group, was more than capable of challenging ships bigger than itself, or if one knows their history, at least one moon-sized Imperial superweapon that could destroy planets. One last note of difference between the two starfighters is that the X-Wing pilot is never alone on their missions for the Rebel Alliance, as each X-Wing was equipped with an astromech droid, often the R2 model, which became ubiquitous with the craft. Astromech droids were important for the X-Wing as they acted as nav computers that allowed for the complex mathematical calculations that made hyperspace travel possible. In addition to that, the astromech improved on the X-Wing's survivability by being able to perform in-flight repairs. But while numbers and component lists help to establish why a starfighter is appealing on an intellectual level, it is the stories of the X-Wing that help to define their character and capture the hearts and minds of potential pilots and enthusiastic onlookers. One such story is the Battle of Eidoloni, during the latter half of the Galactic Civil War in the span of time after the Rebel Alliance's defeat at Hoth, but before the Battle of Endor. 3 years after the Battle of Yavin, the Rebel Alliance had been receiving intelligence communiques from an unknown officer inside the Empire. Unwilling to let this mystery informant continue to be a mystery, Alliance High Command ordered the raid of an Imperial communications array to pick up the signal trail left by the officer and ascertain his identity. Interestingly enough, while the rebels were conducting their operation, the officer in question sent a transmission to them revealing himself as a man named Zaletta, an Imperial commander stationed aboard a space platform in the Eidoloni system. In addition, he made known to the rebels his intentions to defect. High Command could not let this opportunity slip by, and decided to strike while the iron was hot. A flight of Red Squadron X-Wings based off the calamari cruiser Liberty were sent in to attack the Imperial outpost which held Commander Zaletta. Presumably, as no attack by the rebels was ever conceived by Imperial leadership, their defenses were quickly overwhelmed and the platform soon came under attack directly. But the rebels were not there to simply attack and destroy the outpost. No. The plan was to attack and make the Imperials think the chances for complete destruction were imminent. At that point, when structural integrity began to be threatened, the personnel would evacuate the base in Tidarium shuttles. And when that happened, The X-Wings would run identification flybys of each shuttle to determine which one Zaletta was aboard, and in the chaos of the evacuation, spirit him away to the Rebel Alliance's side of the fence. Fortunately for the Rebels, the plan went exactly as planned. The station was attacked and brought to the point where destruction was a real possibility, forcing the Imperial staff and officers to flee aboard their evacuation shuttles, one of which was a shuttle designated AA-23, which, as luck would have it, was transporting a man named Commander Zaletta, their mystery informant, and after a brief communication between the Rebels and Zaletta, was fully on board with their plans for exfiltration. Together, the X-Wings and Zaletta would travel back to the Rebel fleet, but instead of heading to friendly space directly, the Rebels would instead drop out of hyperspace at a point between the outpost and their fleet, and have Zaletta's shuttle dock with the Rebel frigate Redemption, and from there, the Rebels would safely hyperspace back to their territory. But no sooner did Shuttle AA-23 dock with the Redemption and transfer their no longer unknown benefactor aboard, the Imperial Star Destroyer Subjugator and the Interdictor Cruiser Restrainer hyperspaced directly into the area of operations. A trap had been sprung, and the only way the Imperials would know to come to this specific point in the entire vastness of space is if someone tipped them off. And that someone, it seemed, was Commander Zaletta. Now, an Imperial ambush is just a regular day for Rebel Starfighter pilots, but what made this situation in particular extremely dangerous was the Interdictor cruiser trailing the Subjugator. Interdictors were designed with one purpose in mind: block ships from escaping into hyperspace, as well as pulling them out of hyperspace using the 4 gravity well generators all Interdictors had equipped. Escape was impossible, supposedly. But given the high priority placed on Commander Zaletta's defection, the Calamari cruiser Liberty hyperspaced into the combat area and began launching Y-wing bombers against the Interdictor. The plan was simple: hit the Interdictor hard enough for it to either flee or be destroyed, then hyperspace out quickly to avoid taking too many losses, especially with the Liberty in system, as the loss of any of the Rebel Alliance's few Calamari cruisers would be a devastating loss. Unfortunately, standing between them and the Interdictor was the Star Destroyer Subjugator, with its turbo lasers, anti-fighter weaponry, and whole squadrons of TIE fighters and TIE bombers that would be launched in staggered groups. The TIE bombers would attack the frigate and the Liberty, while the TIE fighters would provide cover for the bombers, much like the same way the X-Wings would cover the Y-Wings against the Interdictor. As the X-Wings charged into the TIE swarm, they tore through their foes like tissue paper to a fire. The TIE fighters and interceptors were simply outmatched by the superior abilities and piloting of the X-Wings, and the battle eventually devolved into a slaughter where the Subjugator fed its TIE squadrons to the ever-hungry maw of the Rebel starfighters, with the TIE bombers meeting a similar fate. But the X-Wing pilots were also tasked to engage the Interdictor Restrainer, and while not as specialized in the role of anti-capital ship operations, was more than able to assist the Y-Wings in forcing the Restrainer to flee or face oblivion by their combined laser fire and proton torpedo warheads. Even the TIE Advanced, a technologically superior fighter on paper, which arrived late into the battle, was able to be held at bay long enough by the X-Wings for the Liberty and Redemption to make their escape once the Restrainer was out of the picture, with the X-Wings and Y-Wings following shortly behind them. The Battle of Eidoloni serves to highlight the multi-purpose versatility of the X-Wing. Here, we had the starfighters take part in the interception of the TIE bombers, successfully dogfight other space superiority fighters despite being outnumbered, supporting an anti-capital ship assault, and engaging in capital ship defense and escort, all of which the X-Wing clearly excelled at. As for Zaletta and the mole who betrayed the meeting point to the Imperials, it turned out the traitor wasn't Commander Zaletta at all. It was a rebel officer aboard the Liberty who had been captured and brainwashed by the Imperials after the Battle of Hoth. And to make a long story short, that man was found out shortly after the Battle of Eidoloni, which cleared Zaletta of any deception. Of course, that was just one battle where the X-Wing can be pointed to as a key, if not the decisive factor in a conflict. Beginning from their explosive debut at the Battle of Turkana, there's the destruction of the Death Star and the Death Star 2, the majority of Operation Strike Fear, the evacuation of Hoth, and the Outer Rim campaign against Task Force Vengeance, among many, many battles spanning between the early days of the Rebellion and up to the height of the New Republic, and beyond. And what of after the Galactic Civil War? Well, the X-Wing continued its service with the newly founded New Republic, and in the hands of its skilled pilots, continued its reputation as a popular, reliable starfighter that was often chosen over the more advanced E-Wing. And as time marched on through the Yuuzhan Vong War and into the Second Galactic Civil War, new X-Wing models would debut, such as the XJ series, which had improved shields, maneuverability, targeting computers, sublight acceleration, and a third proton torpedo launcher. As for the Incom Corporation, they never fully recovered from the loss of talent, or the massive hit in reputation they took when they were forced to work for the Imperial Navy, and the Imperials were less than pleased with Incom due to the loss of the X-Wing and the defection of its design staff. These attitudes could be seen with the less than enthusiastic usage of Incom's Y-85 Titan dropship during the Battle of Hoth. The ex-Incom staff members who left, however, prospered. After the Battle of Endor, they would form their own company to make military vehicles, Free Tech Incorporated, and to prove to the galaxy that the X-Wing was not just a one-hit wonder, they created the E-Wing for the New Republic military, which eventually became a well-regarded, highly capable mainstay in the fleet, even if it never reached the heights of fame that its older sister, the X-Wing, did. But the Free Tech owners did not forget their roots, and once the Incom Corporation was fully wrested free of control from the Galactic Empire, Free Tech took ownership over their former employer, and the Free Tech logo and branding would be used to represent the new Weapons and Avionics division for Incom. And finally, no mention of the X-Wing would be complete without at least touching upon the one rebel squadron that arguably did the most to make the Starfighter a legend during the Galactic Civil War, the New Republic era, and up into the time of the Galactic Alliance: Rogue Squadron. Rogue Squadron's origins began after the climactic Battle of Yavin, where the remnants of Red Squadron were combined to make Rogue Flight, and later Rogue Group by the time of the disaster at Hoth. They were led by Rebel pilot, Death Star killer, and future Jedi Luke Skywalker, alongside fellow Red Squadron survivor Wedge Antilles and a small number of other pilots. But after Hoth was when Rogue Group would be expanded into Rogue Squadron through the efforts of Wedge Antilles. Combining the best pilots in the Alliance together, the Rogues would not have a set mission profile, but instead work as an elite, versatile unit that could handle any mission all the way up into the era of the Galactic Alliance, 137 years after the Battle of Yavin. And while to go into their history of accomplishments would be far beyond the scope of this video, rest assured, it is quite extensive. And which starfighter in the Alliance Strike Fleet was considered to be the best at multi-role operations? That's right, the X-Wing. Given the wide gamut of Rogue Squadron's missions and the X-Wing's general versatility, it's little wonder why the names Rogue Squadron and X-Wing became almost synonymous with one another. It is a special occurrence for spacecraft and vehicles to enter into the public consciousness, which includes such luminaries like the YT-1300 light freighters, the Royal Naboo N-1 starfighters, the Moldy Crow, and the T-65 X-Wing. A ship so popular that toys are made of it for children to play with, as they dream of high adventures in space and fighting villains. And that's the other side of the coin when it comes to the X-Wing. Yes, it's a super capable multi-role starfighter, but thanks to its achievements in the Galactic Civil War, the X-Wing also became emblematic of the idea of the outnumbered, outpowered, yet determined and skilled hero triumphing over evil and their machinations. And that, at its core, is the X-Wing.